Hello and welcome to this session about practical considerations for data collection. I love this quote from Stephen Covey and think about it often when I'm planning a big project. Conducting an evaluation of a program certainly qualifies as a big project. So let's begin by thinking about what you want the end of your evaluation to look like. In this case, think about how you collect data in a way that allows you to analyze and report your findings in the way that you hope to. Keeping in mind, of course, that you may have to adjust or change your plans as you go, and in the end the results may look different than you expected. Nevertheless, imagining the end and the ideal scenario, the ideal report, is a useful exercise. As you prepare to start collecting data, you will want to keep in mind the following types of details. Permissions. Whose permission do you need to collect the data? The participants themselves may need to give their consent in some shape or form, but also the program staff or other gatekeepers may need to give you their permission before you start data collection. If you plan to use secondary data like existing program data or document review, you will need to consider how that data will be shared with you, in what format, and under what conditions. For example, you may need to sign a data sharing agreement with the organization you are working with, or you may need to follow certain security protocols required by the organization to protect the data. Once you start collecting the data or receive the secondary data, how will you store it and organize it? Does the organization you're working with have certain requirements? For example, do they consider Dropbox or Google Drive to be secure? If you are storing data on your personal computer, how is your computer protected? You will also want to think about expenses and discuss up front with the organization you are working with how those expenses will be covered. There are likely many other details you will need to consider, but these are some of the major ones. Be sure to have open, honest, and thorough conversations with the program staff and other key contacts about data collection, organization, and storage. Don't make assumptions, and don't be afraid to ask questions that you might consider basic or stupid. There are no stupid questions. With the collection of quantitative data, there are some other details to think through. First, what kind of variables are you collecting? For example, if you are conducting a survey and you want to know how old the respondent is, will you ask their date of birth or current age? Or will you ask them to select an age category, such as between ages 18 and 25? How you phrase your question, the options you give people, and how that data is then entered into your database will ultimately affect how you can analyze the results. So think about types of variables carefully. Speaking of databases, you will need to design a database to enter, store, and analyze your data. For most students, simple Excel spreadsheets will suffice, or you might use an online database like REDCap. Whatever you use, you'll want to be sure you can easily export the data in a variety of formats to your analysis software of choice. Think about your variable names and how you plan to enter the data. For example, will the number 1 always equal yes and 0 always equal no? Be sure to write down your rules and standards, especially if you plan to collect a large amount of data. Also, consider quality control. How will you ensure that data is being entered correctly? How will you handle junk data or missing data? For qualitative data collection, there are other details to consider. First is transcription. The best practice is to transcribe word for word the key informant interviews or focus groups. If you have the available funds, you can hire a professional transcriptionist to do this, but if not, Make sure you give yourself plenty of time to transcribe the recordings. If the interviews or focus groups are being conducted in multiple languages, you will also need to hire or plan to translate the transcripts yourself. Do not rely on apps like Google Translate to do this step for you. These programs are not accurate enough for the purposes of program evaluation. Finally, consider how and where you will securely store the audio or video files, as well as the transcripts. Audio and video files can be very large and may not fit on your personal computer. Next, let's talk about planning for analysis. A good practice at this point, even before you collect any data, is to create what is called dummy tables. These are essentially mock-ups of your final tables you would hope to include in the final report. For example, maybe you want to include a table in your report that presents information about baseline health of the participants. You plan to measure and classify their results on 3 health screenings as normal or abnormal. When creating your dummy table, you might reconsider what data you want to present and how. Here's another way you might present this same data. Instead of classifying people's scores as abnormal or normal, you might prefer to show the average for each measure for the entire group, along with N, the number of people in the data set, and the standard deviation, a measure of how much variation there is in the population. Playing around with dummy tables in advance of data collection will help you make important decisions about what data you collect and how you record it. For example, if you only recorded the abnormal-normal classification in your database, you wouldn't be able to produce this dummy table with actual values, should you want to. It can also be helpful before collecting qualitative data to draft a code book. Unless you plan to use a 100% grounded theory method of analysis, where all the codes emerge from the data, you likely have some codes in mind even before you start data collection. For example, let's say you plan to conduct key informant interviews with program staff about their experiences implementing a new program. Based on initial conversations with stakeholders, you expect that staff will raise the issue of human resources as a major challenge and opportunity for improvement. You know from preliminary conversations that there has been some staff turnover, which left some positions vacant for longer than anticipated. Also, staff training has fallen by the wayside, and finally, volunteers could be used more effectively. This is what you've heard so far. In a dummy code book, you would draft short definitions for each of these codes with the expectation that the definitions will evolve once the interviews formally begin. I have just scratched the surface here with the many details to be considered with data collection. Your particular details will depend on your design, the types of data collection, program stakeholders, and many other factors. Do your best to anticipate the future needs and the results you want. Keep in mind your desired end product, while at the same time not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'll close by sharing this second quote from Stephen Covey. Your most important work is always ahead of you, never behind you. Even in the midst of lots of minutia, stay focused on your goals and the future. Whether that future is your future career and future degree, or simply finishing this course, you are making important progress. Good luck, and if you have any questions, I encourage you to reach out to your instructor. Thank you.